a good publisher or editor-in-chief has to set a tone for the publications that they produce, set a direction for the publications that they publish, and they have to have a vision for not only this year's publications, but for the publishing brand over the next 5 to 15 years. When I look at DC Comics, it's clear to me that they don't have anybody in their executive offices who is setting that tone for the publications, setting that direction for the publications in the DC Comics catalog, and has a long term vision for the DC Comics brand in the 21st century. When I look at Dan Dido, who was the publisher and editor in chief with Jim Lee, and Bob Harris, who's supposed to be an editor in chief, and Jeff Johns, I don't see anyone with a clear picture or a clear understanding of what it means to work in publishing. There is no real direction for DC Comics right now. Everything is jumbled and disjointed and pretty much directionless. Since Dido and the people who work with him came into management at DC Comics back in the early 2000s, the DC Comics brand has gone into a decline, and that is due to the mismanagement. As a lot of people know, Dan Dido does not have any publishing experience, so he doesn't understand how publishing works. Publishing is a long haul business, which is why I say that you have to have a 5 to 15-year plan. There are no shortcuts in publishing. Publishing, again, you have to have, a real backbone to go through, shelter a lot of storms and go through a lot of losses in order to get to the gains. You have to have a very, very strong resolve in publishing because publishing isn't about instant results. It may take a year or 2 years for a book to even find an audience or to even get picked up by casual readers. And you have to have a real backbone to sit there while this book struggles. And I don't see anybody at DC Comics who understands, how publishing works. Even worse, I don't see anybody there who understands the post 2008 publishing world because in 2008, the entire trade publishing industry collapsed. And in its aftermath, the whole publishing world has changed. There is the world before that period, was very different. It was about submissions and all this other stuff, queries. But with the advent of print on demand technology, digital publishing, the marketplace has changed and everything has shifted in favor of creators like myself. And that's a very different marketplace. And no one at DC Comics really has the vision to see where to take the catalog in the 21st century in the post 2008 publishing world. So they still try to apply a 1990s approach to the business in the hopes of trying to get back to 1990s level sales numbers. And that's never going to happen because the 1990s comic book market was completely different than the 2008 publishing world. In the 2008 publishing world, um, comics and any publication have to have good stories and good word of mouth to sell. And DC Comics has not been trying to build that word of mouth. In fact, the word of mouth when it comes to DC products is a lot of anger, frustration, and a lot of people feel very, very alienated by the poor customer service they have received over the last 5 to 15 years regarding DC Comics. Yes, there are comics on the shelves, but they are not comics that many fans want to talk about or want to share with their friends. And again, in public publishing, it's all about word of mouth. And an editor in chief has to really have a plan for building word of mouth. And I don't see that, being done with the DC Comics brand. Again, a good editor in chief has to, again, set the tone for the publications, set the direction for the publications, and has to make efforts to foster goodwill with readers so that they will give the brand and the publications, a good word of mouth. Now, the Dido approach is to create controversy. Yes, Controversy makes a lot of chatter on message boards, but that doesn't generate sales long term, especially with audiences like casual readers. When casual readers just want their favorite characters, they want to see their favorite characters and stories. They want to see action and adventure. They don't want to deal with a lot of drama, a lot of controversy, a lot of arguing. They just want to be able to pick up a Superman story, a Batman story, or a Wonder Woman story and see their favorite character in action. And that's very hard to do in today's DC Comics because every couple of years, DC Comics winds up either rebooting their universe, relaunching their titles, and that makes it very hard for customers to find the product. In addition to not being available in places like your newsstands or your drugstores like your Rite Aids or your Walgreens, your comic book, is very, very hard to access in terms of material because of all these relaunches and all these events. The new reader cannot access the characters that their dads and their moms grew up with. Now, when I was a kid, you would just go to a store and your favorite character was there and you saw them taking on the bad guys. But today, you have to literally have a PhD in DC continuity in order to understand the product. And that's not what a good editor really wants. A good editor really wants their products to be very accessible, very easy to read. They want them to pick up any book and be able to access the characters in the product. Because if the new reader feels this is too complicated to get into, then they're not going to be interested in continuing to buy the product. And this is a big problem with DC Comics and comics overall, at the big two, but with Marvel as well, with this constant relaunching. Kid wants to pick up a Spider-Man comic book. He just saw the Spider-Man movie. He wants to go read Spider-Man. And instead of him seeing Spider-Man taking on one of his bad guys, he's stuck dealing with 616 universe, relaunches, multiple reboots, one more day. And in DC Comics, if he wants to pick up a Batman comic, he's got to deal with Infinite Crisis, Final Crisis, Crisis of Infinite Earths. That's really bogging it down for the new reader. It's just very frustrating. I mean, it's even frustrating for older readers. And that all comes from an editor not being able to set a tone. Because if you don't set a tone and a direction for your product, the customer is not going to be able to access the product. Whenever you have product, again, it has to be easy for the customer to get into. This is why I can agree with Jim Shooter many years ago when he said in a blog that every story is an entry point. And that's an approach that I use with my own SJS Direct titles, is that I make every story an entry point because I understand that maybe this reader has never read, an ISIS series book. Maybe they are not starting with the first ISIS book, which was published in 2002. So maybe their first introduction to the ISIS character would be in a new book like Night of the Vampires, or maybe their first introduction maybe to her in a later book, on a previous book, like The Beauty Myth. And the character has to be written in a way that is accessible to the reader so they can get into the character's adventures, get to know the characters, and, be able to see what's great about the character so that they can either go back into previous stories or go forward with the next more recent stories. And you can't do that today with DC Comics because of the tone and direction that has been set. And, an editor-in-chief has to have that vision and set a good tone for the product, because in today's post-2008 publishing world, comics have a lot of media that they compete with. Comics are now competing with web comics. They're competing with social media. They're competing with ebooks. They're competing with television shows. And they're also competing with superhero movies. So a good comic has to be very accessible to the customer. And we're not seeing that coming out of your DC Comics. And the sad part is DC Comics has one of the most, iconic brands out here, and their publishing division is not equipped to compete in the 21st century. They're still, again, doing business from a 1990s approach hoping, wishing, and praying for that huge surge of readers that usually comes from a number one issue. And number one is no longer a relevant number anymore, especially when you're on your second or third relaunch. And any publisher understands this. I can even compare this to Playboy, which is this year starting to adapt and saying, look, we already know the internet has a whole host of nude pictures. We don't need to do nude pictorials anymore. We have to adapt and create a magazine based on substance to sell to intelligent readers. And I applaud Playboy for that because they're understanding that they have to adapt to the marketplace. But DC Comics sadly has not adapted, and they go through this vicious cycle where yes, you relaunch the titles to a new number one issue, you get a quick surge of sales from speculators who are looking for this number one issue to go up in value in 5 to 10 years, but then you have a quick decline in sales because what happens is during this vicious cycle, yes, everybody's on board for the first 4 or 5 issues or the first 11 or 12 issues with the big star creative teams like your Jeff Johns, like your Scott Snyders, like your big name pencilers. They'll come on for that part of the run. But when these guys start to hit their 22nd, 23rd, or 24th issue, they start to get tired and then they leave. And then when the second tier creative teams come on, the book really starts its drop. I mean, it's declining slowly, but then it really starts to drop. And then by the time you get to the 33rd or 34th issue, the book pretty much has next to no sales. And this happens, every 3 to 5 years at Marvel, and it's happened over the last 5 years at DC. And a lot of people are not looking at that cycle, and that cycle is something an editor has to look at. Again, an editor has to understand that this is a marathon, this is a long-term run, and you have to have contingency plans for whenever your A-list team leaves, and you need to bring in a B team or a C team. And just like a coach, you have to be prepping these back players to be able to play their roles. And this is something that I learned watching the New York Giants way back in 1990 when Phil Simms got injured and Jeff Hostetler had to lead the New York Giants to the Super Bowl. And he managed to do that, because he was prepared and ready. And this is what a good editor has to do. He has to be able to have the vision and, the patience and endurance to work with new young talent to get them ready to take over for these A-list players when they start to get tired in their runs, or they get tired of, working with this character, because I understand what that is as a creator myself. Sometimes you just get tired of working with a character after you've worked with them for 3, 4, maybe 5 years, and you want to, take a break, or you want to go and work with a different character. And while your publications are still running, you need to have creative people who can take over when this other group of creators, decides to leave. And from what I've seen over the last 20, 25 years, there has been no real effort to create a lot of new talent and build up new talent in, the big two in comic publications. A lot of these guys are getting their seasoning in indies, and I see a lot of great talent, in the indies, but they can't crack the big two. And because they can't crack the big two, the books suffer when these, A-list teams leave and there's nobody there to fill in. And because there's nobody there to fill in, there's no way to pick up things. When it comes down to comics, it shouldn't be creative teams that are, the reason why books sell. Books should be selling based on stories. And if you don't have good storytellers, or in terms of writing and art, a book is going to decline. And the reason why a lot of books decline is because a lot of these B and C teams don't have the seasoning to, fill in the void and keep this character fresh. And you really need an editor-in-chief with the vision to understand that, I have to go out here and cultivate and develop brand new talent so that when these books hit that number 24 and number 25 in the marathon, they can pick back up and continue to, maintain their pace instead of, falling flat like they do today. And you have to understand, the publishing cycle. Yes, there are going to be slow periods for a book. There are going to be, stall periods for a book, and you can't just cancel a book. You have to find a way to regroup, and you have to find a way to rebuild interest in that book, and that's something a really good editor in chief does. He tries to rebuild, that interest in a book. If something's not working, he will go and sit down and look at those letters pages and listen to people on message boards, and not take it personal when they say things, but say, look, okay, these people are telling me that this product has issues, and this is the best way to solve them. They find solutions from the customer, because the customer is the one paying for the product. And this is something I had to do myself whenever people were complaining about the book covers when I was hand drawing them for SJS Direct books. So people would tell me, I don't like these covers. So I said, okay, I will try to go out here and hire a professional to design them. I didn't have a lot of money, so I tried to do this through Kickstarters. And I'm still trying to do it through a Kickstarter this year. And you have to find a way to, help let your customers know that you're listening, let them know that you care. And I'm not seeing that at DC Comics. Instead, I'm seeing them go again into this vicious cycle where they don't solve the problem. Instead, they just wind up tearing everything up and starting all over again, instead of saying, you know what, we're making mistakes. We need to, try to rectify these mistakes by, putting a period at the end of some bad stories and moving on, or just dealing with the idea that, some of these ideas that some of these people are coming up with just don't work. These gimmicks, these events, these models are archaic. They don't work anymore. Yes, they worked back in the 1980s and the early 1990s in spurring sales in, mid-card and low-tier books, but they don't work today in a post-2008 world. In a post-2008 world, we really need a focus on, promoting individual stories for individual characters, and we need to sell characters, not creative teams. And that's the only way you're going to get, new younger readers in, because new younger readers identify Superman. They don't know who Jeff Johns is. They don't know who Scott Snyder is. They don't know who any of these guys who draw behind the scenes. They want to know who their favorite character is, and I look at DC Comics. They need to focus, on making their characters prominent again. People want to buy Superman. They want to buy Batman. They want to buy Wonder Woman. They want to buy The Flash. They want to buy Green Arrow. They want to see their favorite characters, and there's no focus on that on the publication side of DC Comics. There's a real focus, really, still on creators, and they really need an editor-in-chief who will take the focus off these creators, again, that 1990s model, and put it on a post-2008 model where we're focusing on developing characters and selling stories, because stories are what's going to get the word of mouth. When a story is really good, readers are going to go and tell their friends about it, and that's going to, build your sales. But I'm not seeing that. Instead, I'm seeing, again, a focus on creators, a focus on gimmicks, a focus on events, and that's not going to sell books these days. The age of the rock star comic artist and the rock star comic writer, that's pretty much over with. The day of the gimmick is pretty much over with. The day of the event is pretty much over with. All these business approaches have pretty much run their course. And I look at the next 10 to 15 years for comics, and when I'm looking at the long term of it, again, it's going to be stories and customer word of mouth that are going to sell comics. If you can't really write good stories, you're not going to get customers to come in. And DC really needs that editor-in-chief with a vision to look at comics from that perspective and look at it and say, look, we need to focus primarily on stories, we need to focus on characters, and we need to get readers to see what's great about DC Comics superheroes, DC Comics characters, and get them excited for the brand. Because when I look at this brand, there's so much arguing and so much anger, and that's really not going to sell product. You cannot use controversy like that to sell product. You really have to get people united, get them together, and get them excited for your product. I saw a lot of that happen in 2008 when Marvel Studios launched Iron Man, and I saw it last year when DC Comics released Supergirl on CBS. They pretty much blew what I saw the golden opportunity of a lifetime when that show got 19 million viewers. Here we have an opportunity to, get people behind the brand, and there was no strategy to reach people that way. Instead, they are still focused on this DC cinematic universe and these dark, angry characters where people are just doing nothing but arguing and going back and forth. You don't need that for a brand. You don't need that for a product. When you have a product out here, you really want to have those customers, energized, excited, and enthusiastic, because energized, excited, and enthusiastic customers are the ones that are going to go out here and buy your product whenever you announce a release date. Energized and enthusiastic customer base is pretty much gonna wanna go out here and tell their friends about the product. Energized and the energy and enthusiasm is what's gonna have you having lines down the block for a product and other retailers looking to stock a product. And I saw that type of energy with the recent Star Wars movie. I saw that type of energy with the Harry Potter series books, and I see, that type of opportunity when I saw Supergirl get those 19 million viewers. There's an opportunity there for DC Comics to reach, build that type of energy, but they're not using the right type of product to do it. You cannot get people excited about anger. I mean, yes, you're going to get a lot of controversy, you're going to get a lot of back and forth, but again, when you have back and forth, you have a split audience, and that means half of the customers that you would have had are staying home, and half of the customers you have are coming to the movie. And you really don't want a split audience, because split audience means you're losing money. And a united audience means you're going to make not only all the money you wanted to make, but you're going to make money from the casual customers as well. And when I look at the DC Comics brand, I don't see that type of vision towards, uniting that customer base. We really need a uniter in the editor's office and in the publisher's office. You need somebody who can bring comic fans together behind their favorite characters. You need somebody who can set a tone that's filled with enthusiasm and energy for the DC Comics brand. And you need to really need someone there who's going to light that spark in creators. Because I looked at, the Dido era, and I've read a lot of bad things from creators, and they're not passionate about the characters because they feel micromanaged, they feel bullied, a lot of them feel frustrated, and you can't really, develop the type of creativity and synergy that you need for a comic book or any sort of publication when your office is filled with a whole lot of negative energy. As a creator myself, I don't like having negative energy. It doesn't really inspire me, and it doesn't excite me to go out and write. So I understand what these creators are going through when you get micromanaged. Usually, when I work with another creator, like I did with Bill Walko on the covers for, East Team Undercover, Isis Night of the Vampires, or Isis Wrath of the Cyber Goddess, what I do is, I talk to them. I talk to a creator. I give them my sketches. I give them my ideas for their story, and I just leave them alone. And whenever they get back to me, I tell them I need it in 2 weeks or a week, because Bill Walko did these 2 covers in a month, and he did this cover in a month, and usually he comes to me with a sketch. I look it over, and it looks good. I'll tell him to go ahead and ink it and color it, and then after that I pay him, and then we move on. That's usually how it goes. Usually when you have a creative process, the writers will pitch, and I've done, that sort of thing. If people like it, they'll ask me for more, and then we go from there. And the same thing, there. With creative people, you have to give them space, and that's something I understand, from experience. You give creative people space, they'll give you something great. And another thing you have to do while you're giving them space is you have to leave your door open, and I had to do that with Lawrence Cherry when I was working on his Christian fiction novels and helping him get them published, and a best-selling author when I was helping her turn her romance novels into ebooks. And having that open door means that you're there to answer their questions, um, talk to them whenever they are feeling having stuck on a story issue, talking them through certain story points, explaining to them why this sequence will work or this could be better. And an editor has to be very tactful, very supportive. They have to be very understanding, and they have to get them to get people to understand, creative people to understand, you know, what their impact is on the character, and that they have to put the character first. They have to make the character a priority, and that they have to make sure that they, do something I call making sure that you don't leave the character in a worse condition than you got them in. And that means when you come into your creative run, just as you got the character, you should leave them in the same condition so the next creator can, create stories with that character. So whenever I work with a character like an Isis or a John Haynes, I try not to, leave lasting damage that some other creator has to spend 6 months to a year, trying to repair, and then they have to literally spend half that time fixing in order to get into their run of stories. So I want them to get right into their stories. So leave the character in the same condition that I've left it in. And that's something that I haven't seen done in comics, in the last 20 years. A lot of creators, they want to leave these big marks where they wind up, killing and maiming people. And that really does not leave the characters or the supporting cast in any sort of condition for the next creator to have anything to work with. I always believe, again, give a creator some space and make sure that they understand, the guidelines, which are, again, the primary one is leave the character in the condition you left them in. Um, Make sure that you're creating, you give and create stories that make that relate to people to today, and have fun while you're doing it. And I really want to bring, if I was an editor in chief of DC, I would try to bring that type of environment there. I look at the sad state of comics at DC, and they really need a editor in chief with some vision, with a direction, someone who wants to set a course, someone who has the patience to sit there for 15 years or 20 years to make every effort to get this brand, to be the best it can be, and someone who will be a support, to other creators, a mentor to other creators, and and who is willing to help people, become more creative, help make these characters, great, and show the world what makes a DC superhero great, what makes them distinct, because I'm not seeing that. When I look at a DC Comics hero today, I see anger and bitterness and, gore and graphic violence, and that's never what a DC Comics character was about. DC superheroes were always supposed to be family friendly, they were supposed to be friends to the community, they were always about, a sense of community and helping those who are in need. And we're not seeing that with any DC product outside of the Supergirl television show. And that the brand needs to get back to that, especially when it comes down to publishing. And the comics need to get back to being family friendly, kid friendly, reader accessible, reader friendly, and going back to being great action packed reads that anybody of any age can feel safe about picking up and not only reading for themselves but sharing with their children. I know a lot of comic fans who are in the median age range of 35 to 40. They've got families of their own and they want to share those comics with their kids, and they can't do that because the content is so graphic. I mean, I think comics should go back to a PG 13 level, because that's the level that most people feel comfortable with. That's what WWE is right now. That's what many of these movies are, superhero movies are right now. And DC Comics needs to go right back to that in their publications. That's the level that I use right now when I do books like those in the ISIS series. Um, I make them family friendly and kid friendly. Um, and I'd like to see DC Comics, follow that same approach. And I think they need an editor in chief who will focus on that type of model, that type of approach, and set a tone and a direction for the brand that is about creating quality family entertainment, and making comics, a family affair for readers of all ages. I believe if they had that type of editor in chief and publisher with that type of vision, the DC Comics brand would be competitive again, and it would be ready to take on the challenges of publishing in the 21st century, because you have to have great stories on any platform, whether it be print, digital, or even outside licensed media. And if the stories aren't great, the readers aren't going to have an incentive to come in. And if the stories aren't accessible, the readers aren't going to have an incentive to come in. Um, a universe should be easy to follow. It should be simple enough for a 5-year-old to understand. And these are concepts that a good editor in chief is going to set up. This is the standards they're going to establish and maintain, and this is what DC Comics needs right now. And they really need this type of editor in chief and publisher to oversee their publications and oversee the long term picture for their publications and the rebuilding of the DC Comics brand. Because right now, the DC Comics brand is damaged from all these reboots and relaunches, and you really don't need to reboot and relaunch all the time. I've been publishing SJS Direct titles since 2009, and I even published books before that in 2002. And I've taken stories from 2002 all the way up to now, and I have not needed to reboot anything or retcon anything. Simply, if a story doesn't work, I'll move on, and I don't need to start anything over, because every story is an entry point, and readers can pick up any story that they want. And I believe that's the way DC Comics, should be. It should be where you can just pick up a Superman comic if you want, and see Superman taking on his bad guys, Batman taking on his bad guys, Wonder Woman taking on her bad guys, Green Lantern taking on his bad guys. And, if you really want to see the Justice League together, you can see them together. And you can just pick up any comic you want and not have a problem having to deal with bogged down continuity, and a whole host of gimmicks and events. You should just be able to, pick up any comic you want and be able to just start reading. Um, that's the way I would do comics if I was, in charge of DC Comics. That would be my vision for the brand, and that would be, my vision for their products, whether it be ebooks, graphic novels, serialized comics. That would be, the long-term plan I would have for DC Comics, because that's the same plan that I use for SJS Direct publications, like those, like the ISIS series and the E-Steam series. And that's how I do my publications, and that's the direction I would set for DC Comics publications. That's all I have to say for this video. You can pick up ISIS series books like ISIS Rather the Cyber Goddess and the ISIS Night of the Vampires and E-Steam Undercover on Amazon.com in paperback and in Kindle. I have a whole host of great books on the SJS Direct imprint. All of them are family friendly and kid friendly, and you can feel safe about giving them to children as young as 8 years old. The cost is not that much. An ebook is on the same price as a comic book, and paperbacks are about the same price as a regular paperback. And that's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.